I want you to picture this for a second. It's 1966. Bobby Moore is leading England to glory with a squad full of guys who grew up there, looked like the fans in the stands, and carried that English spirit. 20 years later, in 1986, the English squad still looks like the people that came to cheer them on. They still look English. Argentina went on to win the World Cup that year, and all 22 players on their squad were born in Argentina and held Argentine citizenship. There were no foreign-born players on the roster. All of them looked exactly as you would imagine Argentinians to look. In the case of the 1966 England team, they won it all at home with a team that still felt connected to the country's roots. Those tournaments meant something. They were real clashes between nations, their people, their culture, and their pride. Now fast forward to the 2026 FIFA World Cup, which recently kicked off in Mexico. Just 9 minutes into the 2026 World Cup opener in Mexico, the very first goal of the whole tournament comes from Julian Quinones, a player of Sub-Saharan African ancestry, born and raised in Colombia, but representing the Mexican national team. He's in the green jersey scoring for Mexico, but does he truly represent Mexico? And look at France, which is a perennial football powerhouse. In their 2018 FIFA World Cup winning squad and the years since, you regularly see starting lineups with 8, 9, or 10 out of 11 players of Sub-Saharan or North African descent instead of ethnic French Europeans. And this isn't one-off stuff. England, Belgium, Netherlands, all the same story. Teams reshaped by passports and migration, not deep heritage. So what happened? Why do these big events suddenly feel to me kind of flat, almost pointless now? It's because multiculturalism and globalism have quietly changed the game. The whole idea of international sports used to be about countries sending their people to compete and show what their nation is made of. And that is just absolutely broken now. What we're watching now is a global talent hunt with flags on the jerseys. And it shows up clearest in how national teams have completely shifted. Think about how it used to work. For most of the last half century, a national team was pretty straightforward. It reflected the actual ethnic, racial, and cultural makeup of the country. Players came up through local systems, they looked like the people cheering them on, and they carried that shared background. The rules were tighter too. You had real ties to the place. And if you fast forward to now, it's mostly paperwork. You can get citizenship by being born there, or naturalized after a few years playing club ball, or even go back a couple of generations with ancestry rules. Players get spotted in African academies, develop in Europe's big clubs, and switch flags for better shots at glory and money. At the 2026 World Cup, a record number of players are representing a country different from where they were born. I believe that number of players was somewhere around 289. To put that number into perspective, that's 26 entire starting 11s for football teams, or roughly 13 entire teams, including the reserve players. France is usually the clearest example of this. Back in 2018, when they won the World Cup, more than half of their 23 players had African ancestry. Places like Cameroon, Mali, Senegal, Algeria. Most were born in France to immigrant families, sure, and they do speak the language. But on the pitch, the team looked very different from traditional France, and it's only gotten more pronounced since. Wealthy countries pull in top athletic talent from Africa and beyond through their club pipelines and citizenship routes. Don't get me wrong, these players are incredibly talented and work hard, but that's not the issue. The issue is the structure. International competitions were built to test nations against each other. Distinct groups showing their collective style, strength, and character. When the teams turn into these mixed bags of imported talent, that deeper meaning just slips away. A France win doesn't feel like France anymore. It feels more like a European club all-star side of African athletes winning under a flag. That's the shift that's making these events lose their spark. What made the tournaments of the past special was that deep sense of, this is us versus them. You watched your country's team and saw people who felt like an extension of your own community. Same roots, same shared history, same cultural vibe. It was national pride in its purest form. When the team actually mirrors the nation, it hits different. You cheer harder because it's personal. Today, a lot of that emotional connection is gone. You look at the pitch and it's a cosmopolitan mix. Talented guys, absolutely. But they don't necessarily represent the nation's traditional identity or demographics. It starts to feel more like a club game with random flags than a true national showdown. I'm sure fans must notice it. Why pour your heart into it when the team doesn't really look or feel like the country it's supposed to stand for? The national part becomes kind of hollow. And it's not just about winning, it's about that resonance. Seeing your people compete and overcome. When it's mostly about which countries imported the best athletes, the whole thing turns into something else. Less tribal, less meaningful. This is why I feel like these events just don't hit the same anymore. The pride feels diluted. Now here's where it gets even more interesting and a bit ironic. Wealthy European countries have basically built a super efficient pipeline for African athletic talent. Top scouts hit up academies in Senegal, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast. Spot the fastest, strongest, most skillful kids, bring them over, develop them in these incredible club systems, and then fast track citizenship so they can play for France, England, Belgium, or whoever. It's smart business for them, but think about what that does to the actual African nations. The best players often end up representing someone else. Instead of strengthening Ghana or Nigeria or Senegal at the World Cup, they're wearing a different jersey. These countries lose their top homegrown stars to the diaspora route. And yeah, we see flashes. Senegal had a great run, Ghana too in the past. But overall, African teams don't dominate like you might expect given the raw talent on the continent. Meanwhile, the European sides stack up. France, with all those players of African roots, becomes this powerhouse. Same with others. It's not that the African players aren't great, they obviously are. The point is the flow is one way. Rich nations get the cream of the crop, and the source countries get hollowed out. It's seen as a win for immigration when European or American teams improve their winning records with their new African immigrant players. But nothing is ever said when the actual African teams quietly drop out of the World Cup early. This makes the whole international setup feel less like proud nations competing and more like a contest between which countries have bought the best Africans. And it's not just football. The same thing is happening across the Olympics. And it might even be more obvious because it's individual sports there. For decades, the Olympics felt like the ultimate showcase of nations. Now, it's become a global shopping spree for talent. FIFA isn't the only one with loose rules. The IOC has its own pathways. 3-year switch periods, ancestry claims, fast-track citizenships. Athletes from one country get recruited or decide to switch flags for better funding, coaching, or just a shot at a medal. It's the same pattern. Wealthier nations with money and infrastructure pull in the best raw talent from around the world, naturalize them, and boom, their medal count goes up. The original countries lose out. The result? Those famous national styles and identities start to blur. The medal table doesn't feel like a true reflection of what each nation can produce from its own people anymore. It's more about who has the best global recruitment and passport game. Talent is talent, and these athletes train incredibly hard wherever they end up. But that's exactly the point. When the Olympics and World Cup turn into talent import competitions, they lose what made them magical in the first place. It stops being about distinct nations and their unique strengths, genetics, culture, development systems, and becomes another version of the global club market, just with national anthems playing in the background. And that's why I switch off feeling like, what's the point? The events are still flashy, the production is huge, but the soul, that real national pride and representation, has been drained out by this wave of multiculturalism and borderless globalism. So putting it all together, why do these big tournaments just not hit the same way anymore? First off, it's become way more predictable. The richest countries with the best scouting networks and club academies end up hoarding the top talent from around the world. Underdog stories, those genuine national breakthroughs, get rarer. Instead of watching a country punch above its weight with homegrown players, it often feels like whoever imported the best athletes wins. Then there's the fan side of things. That tribal loyalty, that deep emotional pull. It's fading for a lot of people. When you watch your national team and half the starting 11 don't really share the ethnic, cultural, or historical roots of the country, it's harder to feel that this is us connection. It starts feeling more like an expensive club exhibition with different colored jerseys than a true battle of nations. You end up with this weird mix: massive production, billion-dollar broadcast, celebrity players, but less and less actual national pride on the line. It's turned into a contest of who has the best global recruitment system rather than whose people are the strongest, smartest, or most skilled in their own right. The magic of the World Cup and Olympics always came from that sense of distinct nations showing what they're made of. When multiculturalism and globalism blur those lines so completely, the events lose their soul. They become flashy, but kind of hollow. It's like watching a movie where the actors are incredible, but the story no longer makes sense. You might still enjoy the spectacle, but you walk away not really caring the same way. Now, I know some of you watching are probably thinking, come on, this is just meritocracy in action. The best players should play, right? And yeah, I get that. In club football, it makes total sense. It's a global market, you buy the best talent, you win. But international competitions were never supposed to be the same as clubs. They were meant to be about nations, distinct peoples, cultures, and homegrown talent going head to head. When it turns into pure meritocracy with passports as the only requirement, then why even have national teams? We might as well just have one giant global league and drop the flags altogether. Another common pushback is immigrants and diversity enrich the teams. And in some ways, sure. They bring talent, different styles, and excitement in the short term. But here's the thing: it also dilutes the unique national character that made these tournaments special. Traditional French technical flair, Brazilian creativity shaped by their streets, English physicality rooted in their own development. Those things start to blur when teams become collections of imported athletes. It's enrichment for some, but erasure of distinct identity for the sport as a whole. People also say, this has always happened. Players switch nations in the past, too. That's true to an extent. There was always some movement. But the scale and speed today, driven by mass migration, multiculturalism policies, and super loose eligibility rules, is completely different. We're talking record numbers of foreign-born players and entire starting lineups that no longer reflect the country's traditional population. It's transformation rather than evolution. And finally, you'll hear stats about how diverse teams perform better. Fair enough on the scoreboard sometimes, but this video isn't arguing about who wins more trophies. It's about the meaning. When the deeper sense of national representation and pride disappears, you can have all the wins in the world and the event still feel kind of pointless for some fans. I'm not saying every single player with immigrant roots is invalid. Plenty have genuine ties and contribute. I myself am an immigrant in the country I'm living in. The critique is aimed at the system and the broader trend, not individuals. The question is simple. If national teams no longer represent nations in any real sense, what's left of international competition? Before I wrap this video up, I want to be straight with you about something. There are a couple of countries where this whole discussion gets even messier, and it makes the argument trickier for some people. Take the United States. America has had a large population of African descent for hundreds of years, going all the way back to slavery. Those communities have deep roots in the country, multiple generations, American culture, American identity. So when you see black athletes dominating for Team USA in basketball, track and field, or other sports, it feels different than a French squad where most of the players' parents or grandparents arrived fairly recently from West Africa. In the US case, you can argue it's more like a long-established part of the national fabric, even if the demographics have shifted dramatically over time. It blurs the line between organic national stock and recent imports. Then there's Australia, a relatively young country that was starting to be settled around the same time that the United States was fighting for independence from England, but didn't formally become a country until 1901. It was founded mainly by the British, then filled out by waves of Europeans after World War II. For a while, the team still had that clear Anglo-European character, but in the last few decades, it's changed fast. Now you see way more players and athletes from Asia, Africa, India, the Middle East, and beyond. The population itself has been transformed through heavy immigration. These examples make it harder to have a clean black and white conversation. Critics can point to them and say, see, nations have always been melting pots. And in a sense, they're right that pure ethnic homogeneity has rarely existed anywhere for long. But here's the key distinction I'm making in this video. There's a huge difference between gradual integration over centuries and the rapid, large-scale transformation we've seen in many European countries over just the last 30 to 40 years. In my lifetime alone, some European countries and even America itself have become almost unrecognizable from the countries that I knew as a kid. In France, England, or Belgium, the shift in national teams has been dramatic and recent, often 1 or 2 generations at most. The players frequently have stronger ties to their parents' or grandparents' home countries than to centuries of local tradition. The core issue remains: when national teams stop reflecting the historic peoples and cultures of the countries they represent, the international part loses its meaning. International competitions like the World Cup and the Olympics were never just about the best athletes winning trophies. They were about nations, real nations, sending teams that represented their people, their history, their culture, and their shared identity. Multiculturalism and globalism have changed that. National teams have become passports and paperwork operations, talent pipelines pulling the best African athletes into European squads, and global recruitment contests wearing national jerseys. France doesn't feel like France anymore. Mexico scoring with a Colombian-born player of African racial heritage in the World Cup opener doesn't feel like Mexico, and the actual African countries get drained of their stars. The rapid transformation in so many countries over just a couple of generations has stripped away the soul of these events. What's left is spectacle without substance, expensive, flashy, and increasingly pointless for anyone who cared about genuine national pride. Of course, in the modern world, you're no longer allowed to have national pride, but that could be the subject of an entirely different video on its own. We have a choice going forward. We can keep loosening the rules until national teams mean nothing, or we can tighten eligibility back to real, meaningful ties, birth, long-term residency, and actual connection to the country's historic people. Because without that deeper representation, we're not watching countries compete. We're just watching flags on a global talent show. And honestly, what's even the point anymore?